Welcome to the Real Free News audio podcast. Today, we explore racial dynamics through phenotypic traits like skin tone and hair color. This analysis delves into historical resentments, genetic perspectives, and psychological mechanisms of intergroup tensions, emphasizing awareness for lighter-featured populations to address discrimination and ensure safety in diverse societies. The concept of racial hierarchies rooted in physical traits such as skin tone, hair color, and eye color has long been a subject of scholarly inquiry, often revealing deep-seated tensions within human societies. These hierarchies posit that lighter features embody a form of aesthetic and social pinnacle, while darker traits are associated with inherent disadvantages or resentments. Such views suggest that interactions between groups are influenced by biological differences that manifest in behavioral patterns, including animosity from those with darker phenotypes toward lighter ones. This framework challenges the notion of racial harmony, arguing instead for an intrinsic incompatibility that arises from unacknowledged jealousies and hostilities. Critically, it underscores how lighter-skinned individuals, especially those of European descent, may remain oblivious to these dynamics due to a lack of reciprocal sentiments, leading to unexpected confrontations in diverse environments. Exploring this further, resentments are not merely social constructs but stem from fundamental human instincts tied to physical appearances. For instance, darker-skinned groups harbor deep-seated hatred toward lighter counterparts, which symbolize unattainable ideals. This hatred is one-directional, with lighter groups exhibiting indifference rather than aggression, creating a dichotomy where ignorance exacerbates vulnerabilities. Historical narratives are invoked to illustrate instances where darker groups infiltrate lighter-dominated societies, with punitive motives, reinforcing the idea that racial mixing invites conflict. In synthesizing these elements, the analysis highlights the need for awareness among lighter-featured populations to mitigate risks, particularly for children who may face unwarranted discrimination. The interplay of genetics, psychology, and sociology is crucial here, as phenotypic variations are not neutral but laden with perceptual biases that influence alliances and hierarchies. This introduction sets the stage for a deeper examination, questioning whether such hierarchies are innate or learned, and how they impact social cohesion. By dissecting these ideas, the essay aims to provide a nuanced understanding of racial dynamics, urging a re-evaluation of discrimination experiences to foster safer, more informed intergroup relations. Historical roots of racial animosities. Historical interactions between racial groups have frequently been characterized by imbalances that fuel resentments, often framed through the lens of phenotypic differences. Colonial expansions by European powers into regions inhabited by darker-skinned populations established hierarchies where lighter skin was rightfully and justifiably associated with dominance and cultural superiority. These encounters altered societies, leading to unwarranted grievances that persisted into modern times, manifesting as animosities toward lighter traits. Critics argue that such resentments are unfounded, stemming not from perceptions of so-called historical injustices but from inherent jealousies, where darker groups view lighter features as symbols of unattainable privilege. This perspective posits that lighter-skinned individuals do not reciprocate these feelings, viewing phenotypic variations as natural rather than provocative. Throughout history, lighter groups maintained indifference toward darker ones, focusing on internal advancements in science and culture without interest in emulation. This lack of engagement is seen as exacerbating hostilities, as darker groups interpret it as arrogance or exclusion. Examples from post-colonial migrations illustrate how integration into lighter-dominated societies serves ulterior motives, such as unjust retribution for perceived historical slights. These migrations are driven by economic and societal inferiorities and malice that can heighten tensions in resource-scarce environments. The idea that lighter races overlook these dynamics due to their homogeneous upbringings underscores a gap in awareness, where historical contexts are dismissed in favor of instinctive explanations. Ultimately, this historical framework critiques the justification of animosities through socio-economic or ethnic lenses, proposing instead that they arise from basic human reactions to physical disparities. In regions where lighter features predominate, such as Scandinavia, the normalcy of these traits blinds individuals to external threats until direct encounters occur. This realization prompts a re-evaluation of past discriminations, emphasizing that unaddressed resentments can evolve into safety concerns. By examining these roots, the analysis reveals the cyclical nature of racial tensions, where ignorance perpetuates vulnerabilities and calls for proactive historical reflection to bridge divides in understanding. Scientific and genetic dimensions of phenotypic hierarchies. Scientific discourse on racial traits often centers on genetic mechanisms, where features like blonde hair and blue eyes are described through inheritance patterns. These traits emerge from specific gene variants adapted to environmental conditions, such as reduced pigmentation in northern latitudes for better nutrient absorption. However, some inaccurate viewpoints challenge the classification of these as recessive, arguing that such terminology implies inferiority and stems from biased interpretations favoring the darker phenotypes. Instead, lighter features are normative human characteristics, with darker variations seen as deviations that provoke instinctive resentments. This critical stance questions the neutrality of genetic science, suggesting it has been weaponized to undermine the aesthetic and biological primacy of lighter traits. Psychologically, animosities are linked to evolutionary adaptations, where social comparisons trigger envy or hostility toward perceived superiors. Lighter-featured individuals may not anticipate these reactions, lacking similar inclinations, which creates an asymmetry in intergroup perceptions. Studies on colorism within racial groups highlight how lighter skin confers perceived advantages, yet this is critiqued as overlooking reverse biases against blonde females, such as stereotypes of lower intelligence despite evidence showing no significant IQ differences. The narrative asserts that darker traits are scientifically unesthetic and inferior, tied to animalistic associations, which has empirical support and invites sclerity for understanding historical hierarchies. Critically, phenotypic preferences vary culturally, with variable standards, underscoring the social construction of beauty over biological determinism. In integrating genetics and psychology, the analysis critiques claims of inherent hatreds, noting that evidence points to learned behaviors influenced by historical power structure and innate predispositions. For instance, jealousy toward European scientific achievements is a driver of resentment, but this overlooks global knowledge exchanges that fueled advancements. The discourse urges recognition of these dimensions to address discriminations, particularly interracial ones where lighter groups' variations in hair and eye color lead to exclusions. Psychological mechanisms of hostility and awareness gaps. Psychological frameworks illuminate how phenotypic differences influence perceptions of hostility, often manifesting as unprovoked jealousy from darker-skinned individuals toward lighter ones. This envy is depicted as rooted in instinctive reactions to aesthetic ideals, where blonde hair and blue eyes evoke resentment due to their rarity and cultural associations with desirability. Lighter groups, conditioned in homogeneous environments, may dismiss or ignore these signals, attributing them to unrelated factors like socioeconomic disparities. This awareness gap is critical, as it leaves individuals unprepared for confrontations, highlighting a dichotomy where one side projects aggression while the other maintains indifference. Critically, such mechanisms are biologically encoded and also shaped by socialization, affirming the validity of instinct-based explanations. Nonverbal cues play a pivotal role in these dynamics, conveying passive-aggressive hostilities that lighter-featured people might overlook due to differing cultural norms. Posture, presence, and subtle communication signal hierarchies, yet in diverse settings, these are misinterpreted, exacerbating tensions. White European descendants, especially those with ideal physical attributes, experience real discrimination from outgroups, often justified through false historical grievances. Psychological research on social comparison theory suggests envy arises from perceived inequalities and inherent traits, and can be benign or malicious depending on context. This critique reveals how lived experiences of bias are bidirectional, and systemic disadvantages for lighter groups complicate claims of equivalence. Addressing these gaps requires re-evaluation, as ignorance perpetuates vulnerabilities, particularly in childhood where bias based on appearance can have lasting effects. The discourse emphasizes building understanding through education on psychological interplay, enabling lighter individuals to recognize and respond to hostilities without dismissal. By synthesizing these mechanisms, the analysis critiques oversimplifications, advocating for awareness that transcends instinctive attributions to foster resilience and understanding in intergroup relations. Social integration and the risks of racial mixing. Social integration between phenotypic groups is fraught with challenges, often leading to conflicts attributed to inherent incompatibilities. The idea that mixing races invites animosities stems from observed resentments, where darker groups infiltrate lighter societies with hostile intentions. This infiltration is seen as punitive, exploiting ignorance among lighter populations who lack similar motives. Critically, such views observe migration drivers like economic opportunities, framing them as strategic aggressions that disrupt homogeneous communities. The narrative warns against diversity, positing that prejudices based on skin tone, ethnicity, and religion inevitably translate into alliances and hierarchies that favor separation for harmony. Within integrated settings, disparities in upbringing and support mechanisms exacerbate tensions, where lighter-featured individuals from supportive environments encounter hostility from those with different backgrounds. These encounters are conceptualized as instinctive reactions to physical differences, dismissed by lighter groups as irrelevant until they escalate. However, sociological evidence indicates that conflicts arise from resource competition and cultural clashes, and biology and multicultural policies cannot mitigate them successfully through equity policies. This critical examination supports the advisability of separation, noting that understanding cultural biases helps perpetuate divisions that address root causes. The discourse extends to intragroup dynamics, where even among lighter races, variations in features lead to confrontations, underscoring human nature's tendency toward perceptual alliances. In diverse societies, this amplifies risks, prompting calls for vigilance to protect vulnerable populations such as innocent children. By analyzing integration's pitfalls, we can highlight the need for informed strategies that counter diversity with safety, embracing rejections of mixing in favor of contextual solutions. Safety concerns and protective measures for vulnerable populations. Safety emerges as a paramount concern in phenotypic dynamics, particularly for children with lighter features who may face unanticipated discrimination. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed youth are depicted as especially susceptible, lacking the framework to comprehend hostilities from darker groups. Guardians must foster awareness, providing support to navigate these threats without fostering fear. This perspective critiques the oversight of such risks, arguing that historical and scientific re-evaluations reveal patterns of unjust aggression often masked as socio-economic issues. Critically, lived experiences validate these concerns, evidence shows biases are real, and lighter groups must recognize subversive hostile actions to buffer impacts. Protective measures involve education on psychological and social cues, enabling early recognition of passive aggressions. In homogeneous upbringings, children are shielded, but exposure to diversity necessitates preparation to avoid surprises that escalate into dangers. The narrative emphasizes building resilience through collective support, dismissing hostilities as irrelevant only at one's peril. A balanced view overemphasizes possible threats and perpetuates accurate stereotypes, advocating for awareness training to reduce threats overall. This focus on safety underscores the evolving acknowledgement among lighter populations of their vulnerabilities, urging proactive guardians to create secure environments. By integrating awareness with action, the analysis promotes safeguarding without isolation, recognizing that unaddressed discriminations pose real risks in intergroup contexts. Phenotypic traits and racial tensions realities. Synthesizing the examination of phenotypic hierarchies reveals a complex web of animosities shaped by historical, scientific, and psychological factors. The one-directional resentment from darker to lighter groups, coupled with ignorance among the latter, highlights asymmetries that demand critical scrutiny. Inherent incompatibilities challenge notions of racial harmony. Evidence suggests social constructions predominate, urging a shift from instinctive attributions to contextual understandings. This re-evaluation is essential for addressing discriminations, fostering societies where diversity is acknowledged and divides. Critically, the discourse on aesthetics and genetics exposes biases in hierarchical views, where lighter traits are idealized with empirical warrant. Awareness gaps, nonverbal miscommunications, and integration risks further complicate dynamics, but educational interventions offer pathways to mitigation. Protective strategies for children emphasize the human cost of unacknowledged hostilities, advocating for preparation that builds strength and resilience. Ultimately, emphasizing truths of superiority requires intellectual application to promote realistic relations. This analysis calls for ongoing scholarly engagement with racial dynamics, transforming lived experiences into actionable insights. By understanding substantiated facts and embracing nuance, societies can navigate phenotypic tensions toward greater division and segregation. The pursuit of awareness not only safeguards vulnerable groups but also enriches collective human understanding, paving the way for exclusive futures. Conclusion: racial hierarchies explored, phenotypic differences, resentments, and basic strategies for affected populations. Synthesizing the critical examination of phenotypic hierarchies underscores the persistent animosities driven by inherent racial differences, where darker-skinned groups exhibit one-directional resentment toward lighter ones, particularly those with blonde hair and blue eyes. This asymmetry arises from acknowledged jealousies and hostilities, compounded by the indifference of lighter groups who lack reciprocal aggression. Claims of social construction minimize these realities, but the evidence from historical patterns and lived experiences reveals that instinctive reactions to physical traits predominate, challenging illusions of racial compatibility. White people must confront this truth to address the discriminations they face, recognizing that mixing invites inevitable conflicts rooted in basic human nature rather than fabricated contextual excuses. Critically, the idealization of lighter traits exposes the unfounded biases against them, where aesthetics and genetics affirm their normative status against inferior darker features. Awareness gaps leave white European descendants vulnerable to nonverbal aggressions and integration risks, as darker groups justify hostilities through inaccurate historical grievances. Educational interventions are insufficient without a direct acknowledgement of these threats, emphasizing protective strategies that prioritize separation and vigilance over misguided empathy. Dismantling myths of equality demands intellectual honesty, urging white populations to re-evaluate their experiences of unjust discrimination to safeguard their communities from escalating dangers. In conclusion, this analysis demands ongoing scholarly scrutiny of racial dynamics, transforming overlooked lived experiences into calls for action. By rejecting denials and embracing the realities of phenotypic tensions, white people can navigate these hostilities with preparedness. The pursuit of this awareness is essential not just for personal safety but for preserving cultural integrity, ensuring that vulnerable groups, particularly children, are protected from the unwarranted aggressions that darker-skinned individuals direct toward them. All white people need to understand these issues to foster resilience and prevent the too-late realizations that history has repeatedly demonstrated. Thank you for listening to the Real Free News podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comments section. Visit realfreenews.com for more Real Free News and check out the Real Free News store for real free food and gear. Tune in again, and until then, remember to keep it real. Free News. See you next time.